because it's Al Shem Moshe. Why? Because it's the klal of the whole Torah. Right? The paraduma somehow is representative of the Torah in general. And since the whole Torah is shaykh to Moshe, so paraduma is called Al Shem Moshe. That's the basic answer. Now we're in the second answer that's more specific. Right? The first answer was that every mitzvah has to be done. This is the end of his base. Every mitzvah has to be done by Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. And we learned that from Moshe Rabbeinu teaching us Kriya Shema before we went into Eretz Yisrael. And we learned an interesting point about that, the fact that Kriya Shema obviously had to be around for the previous 40 years. It's not that we didn't know about Kriya Shema until the 40th year in the desert, which is Devarim, which is when we were actually told explicitly in the Torah that there's something called Kriya Shema. And what was our proof? What was our very strong argument to say that Kriya Shema was around before the 40th year?
Because Korach argued on Mysticism is Zot.
Beautiful. You saved my life. Thank you very much. Right? Beautiful. When Korach in the second year in the desert complained to Moshe Rabbeinu, one of his questions was, does a house that's full of books require a mezuzah? What do we learn about a mezuzah? Kriya Shema. What's written in a mezuzah? So obviously in the second year in the desert, Kriya Shema was around. Right? Were the Yidden saying Kriya Shema? Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But it was written in their mezuzahs. They knew about a mezuzah. How'd they know about a mezuzah? It shows up 40 years later. Kriya Shema was around. They knew it. We also mentioned that the Rebbe that doesn't here, and he didn't mention this either, but the Medrash about Yaakov and his son, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem Fred Malchus Eliyah Lomvad, the conversation that Yaakov had with his children before he passed away. They said, Shema Yisrael, listen, don't worry, Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, we're into it. Okay, so, that being said, Moshe Rabbeinu taught us Kriya Shema before we entered into Eretz Yisrael because what was necessary was Mesiras Nefesh for mitzvahs. That's the middle paragraph in Ois base. Right? The last paragraph in Ois base, which we're almost finished, another answer to that question. The question as to why Paradum is specifically connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that is, first answer was Mesiras Nefesh and the Mesinas Koyach. The empowerment for Mesiras Nefesh comes from Moshe Rabbeinu. We talked about that at length yesterday. Now the Rebbe is talking about the Indian of Kabbalas Ol, the idea of a choik chakakti u gezeda gezarti. I established a choik, a statute, and I decreed a decree. In other words, listen to what I say, not because it resonates in your intellect. Listen to what I say because I said it. Right? That's Kabbalas Ol. Why do we do what the Eibishter wants? Because the Eibishter wants. Can I explain that intellectually? Perhaps yes, perhaps not, but it's irrelevant. The ultimate source of the behavior is that this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, and therefore this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets. That's called that's Kabbalas Ol. And we didn't see it here, but there's a famous Maimer Lesim Shekela, which is generally learned in this room. I don't know whether did we get around to it this year somehow? I don't think we learned it this year, which is bizarre. Very important Maimer, the Rebbe said, the Parshas Mishpatim Tavshin Yud Beis, that Kabbalas Ol means even if my ratzon, my will, my seichel, my intellect, my midas, my emotions aren't connected to this in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to do this. I don't understand why I'm doing it. And I don't feel any connection to it whatsoever. I do it anyway. That's the ultimate in Kabbalas Ol. Why do I do it? Because Yehudi said so. I want to do it? Really? I have some sort of intellectual appreciation of it? I feel an emotional connection to it? No. And yet still what? That's the Eved. That's Avedis Eved, and that's interesting why. The Rebbe explains in that Maimer, that's why when we talk about the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah uses a very interesting word. Vavadetem es Hashem Elokeichem. Vavadetem. That's the word for service. Now, of course, the root of the word is Eved. An Eved. An Eved wants to do what he does. An Eved understands in a deep level as to why it is he's doing what he's doing. Right? The Eved has an emotional connection to what he's doing. Yeah, yes or no. The servant, the slave? Yeah, maybe. Does he do it? Absolutely. Right? Without batting an eye. And that's the basis of a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, because, and not that that's where we want to end up. We don't want to end up there. We want to end up there where it resonates in our seichel, where we have an emotional connection to it, where we mamish want to do it, right? That's where we want to end up. But what's the basis of it all? The commitment of Kabbalah Soul. Why are you doing it? Because God wants. Do you understand it? Yeah. Do you like it? Yeah. Do you want to do it? Absolutely. Is that why you're doing it? No. No, and that always has to remain. That's why that's the basis of the relationship. Because if my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu is based on my intellectual appreciation of how amazing Torah is and how God's so wonderful, and therefore I want to serve Him, so then I'm serving my intellect. I'm ultimately positing my intellect is the ultimate arbiter of truth, and whatever my intellect says, I'll do. Now that can be very dangerous, as we all know from ever reading a headline on any newspaper, website. Yeah? Okay. So the basis of it all is Kabbalah Soul. Where does the Koyach of Kabbalah Soul come from? Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like Mesiras Nefesh, so to Kabbalah Soul. That's where we are now. L'hoisif. We'll just start from the beginning. We read a few lines of it yesterday, but we'll start again from the beginning of L'hoisif. We filled in a lot of blanks, and a lot of what we talked about yesterday, we're going to see in the Maimer today, right? Because we talked about Mishpat and Choik a lot yesterday. Amongst the explanations, mitzvahs paraduma klolos kol Torah. The mitzvahs paraduma is somehow the generality of all of Torah, and of course that's based on the pasuk that says Zos Chukas HaTorah. It doesn't say Zos Chukas HaPara. That's how we started this Maimer. Right? Why does it say this is the chayk of the Torah? Say this is the chayk of para, of the paraduma. Just like what halacha does it say that specifically? It relates to the halacha itself as opposed to the Torah in general. Zois, beautiful. Zois chukas hapasach. Right? When it talks about the chayk of Korban Pesach, it says Zois chukas hapasach. So why not say Zois chukas hapara? Oh, because paraduma is somehow indicative and includes within it all of the Torah. Okay. Shaloche nemar ba Zois Chukas HaTorah, and therefore it says by it Zois Chukas HaTorah, not Zois Chukas HaPara. Who? Another reason. The first reason was you need a Mesiras Nefesh. Ki yesoid de kol hamitzvahs hu shem chuka. The foundation of all mitzvahs is choik. So we just talked about. Hainu she hamitzvahs hem rotzen ha'elyen shelamayla me'aseichel. Mitzvahs ultimately all come from one very important place, the will of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And will is beyond intellect. Will powers intellect. Will is a superconscious or subconscious, right? But we'll talk about it in superconscious terms. It's a superconscious power. What does that mean it's a superconscious power? Well, I don't have immediate control over it. I do have immediate control over my seichel. If you don't want to think about something, stop thinking about it. You want to think about something, so start thinking about it. Right? Okay. Can I not want something? No. I want it. That doesn't mean I have to think about it, speak about it, or do it, but I don't have control over whether I want it. I want a cheeseburger. God forbid. Okay. Do I have control over not wanting a cheeseburger at this particular moment? No. I have a taiva for a cheeseburger. All right? Okay. So what's the response to that? Stop thinking about it. Certainly don't talk about it, and definitely don't eat it. Okay? How do you stop thinking about it? Start thinking about something else. It'll come back later, okay. Say a nigga. Whatever. You have control over your machshava, dibur, and ma'isa. That's Tanya. That's what Tanya's all about. Is teaching us how to have control over thought, speech, and action. What don't I have immediate control over? Ratzon. Why? Because it's a higher, superconscious power, or again, if it's coming from a lower place, a subconscious power. And I don't have control over I don't have immediate control over my subconscious. Over time, I can affect my subconscious. I can change it to a certain degree. Right? I can become a person who's decided that a particular type of food is really not a good type of food and it's not healthy. And at first I'll have to force myself not to eat it because I've decided it's not good for me. But after a few years, I will no longer have any desire for it whatsoever. And it just won't be part of my reality, conscious or subconscious. The cigarette smoker, 10 years later, finds the smell of cigarettes as abhorrent and disgusting as all the rest of us. And when a cigarette smoker walks past him, he goes, "Ugh, it smells like an ashtray." Okay. 10 years earlier, he was that guy. Right? Now, the day he decides intellectually that it's a good idea to stop smoking cigarettes, does he no longer have a desire to smoke cigarettes? Oh, wow. Okay, so now, get rid of the physical addiction. 2 weeks later, he's not physically addicted. Now, he's still very powerfully emotionally addicted. Okay. So, what does that mean, emotionally addicted? Where are those emotions? That's subconscious reality, right? Okay. So how long is it going to take him to change that subconscious reality? That's going to take a while. Can't change it today. He can change his action today. He hasn't had a cigarette for 3 weeks. He can't change certain aspects of himself so quickly. Over time, yes, but so no. And what's that expressive? Will. Because it's not conscious me. It's beyond conscious me. Where do mitzvahs come from? That place in the Eibishter. They say that where a person's will is, that's where he is. What a person wants, that's most indicative of where he's holding, who he really is. Right? He wants to, pillage and plunder, but he controls himself. Well, he's a lowlife. I say he's behaving fine, but he's really just a lowlife. Okay. He really wants to do the right thing, and he wants to be a caring person and a person who's sensitive to godliness, and he really, really wants that. But he has a hard time. He has a hard time expressing that all the time. Okay, but he's really a very able person. He's a very special person. He hasn't quite brought that down into the everyday conscious reality, but he's working on it. Okay, so he's a very special person. All right? So there might be some guy who looks so frum, but really all he's thinking about is sitting on the beach all day. That's really what he wants. He realizes he can't because God will beat him up. And so he sits and learns Torah all day. Not very impressive. I mean, it's impressive that he sits and learns Torah all day, but in terms of who he is, well, he has some work to do. All right? And there might be another guy who has a hard time actually sitting down in front of the book, but that's what he really wants to do, and he's really working on getting himself to be more disciplined and more able to appreciate what has to happen, etc., etc. Okay, so he's in a pretty good place. He's just got to figure out how to actually make it happen in his life, but it's in a good place. Baal Shem Tov says, you are where your rutzin is. What do you want? Well, that's where you are. So what does the able to want? Mitzvah. Okay, and what's the source of the mitzvah? The rutzon, not seichel. Yes, as we learned yesterday, and we're going to see it inside today. Sometimes the rutzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu descends down and is clothed in seichel, in intellect. You and I call that a mishpat. Right? Now we're going to see, as we said yesterday, and the Rebbe's going to talk about it, every mitzvah has an aspect of mishpat, because there's intellect in every mitzvah. It just might be that intellect is solely godly intellect and in no way, shape, or form descends down so that it resonates in human intellect. And we'll see technically what that means today. Okay. So the ultimate source of a mitzvah is Ratzon Elyon. V'lochen gam kiyumam tzarich liyez b'derech Kabbalas Ol. Therefore, the performance of the mitzvah has to be b'Kabbalas Ol. I'm doing this why? Because God wants. Chukah hakakti gezeder gezarti. That's basically where we got to yesterday. And based on this, it can be understood even more. Why Paraduma is called on the name of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was the first question we asked in the Maimer, on the first page, third line. In order that the performance of all of the mitzvahs, even those mitzvahs that have a tam, even those mitzvahs that have a reason. And we'll see very soon, the Rebbe is going to explain, that the reason actually conceals the ratzon. When I become aware of the reason of a mitzvah, it might be hard to be appreciative of the ratzon, the will, the godly will of the mitzvah, because the mitzvah makes so much sense. So it's connected to Moshe. Why? They Shekim Kol mitzvahs. In order that the fulfillment of all the mitzvahs. Skip the brackets. Shiur ba'oifen will be in a way the Zos Chukas Torah. This is the choik of the Torah, that we're doing the mitzvah because it's a function of the ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and nothing else. I mean, that's the basis of it. Hu al yedei Torah mitzvah. This is because the Torah and its mitzvahs, gam lacharei shenisalav shebechochma v'seichel, and now we see the Rebbe use those words. We used it outside yesterday. Gam also after shenisalav that it's been clothed. Clothing a lavush is a means of expression. It's expressed bechochma v'seichel, in wisdom and intellect. It's still nikras al shmei shel Moshe. Still Moshe. Torah's Moshe. Why? As we said earlier, Shinyonehu bittul. The whole Inyan of Moshe is bittul. We said that relative to Mesiras Nefesh. Now we're also saying it relative to Kabbalah Soul, but a slightly different aspect of Moshe. And what's that? Moshe Avdi. Torah's Moshe Avdi. Moshe the Eved. That's really interesting, Moshe the Eved, because Moshe is, of course, the person who understands more than anybody else, as we will see, and yet he's still the Eved. He's still an Eved. Still the one whose service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not based on his intellectual understanding, but based on his appreciation of the fact that the Eibishter is the Eibishter, and he's the Eibishter's Eved. What the Eibishter wants goes. Statement that's mentioned by the Rebbeim all the time. A Chassid is a Kabbalah Solnik. Chassid is someone who is a Kabbalah Solnik. What does that mean? He does what he does because it's supposed to be done. By virtue of the fact that Moshe is connected on this level, then of course, same idea that we saw by Mesiras Nefesh, there's an Asinas Koyach l'kol echad Yisrael, there's an Asinas Koyach to every single Jew. Al Yedei, now the Rabbi adds something that he did not say relative to Mesiras Nefesh. Al Yedei Bechinas Moshe Shabbai, based on the quality of Moshe that is in him. Tanya, Perek Mem Beis, very famous idea that the Baal Tanya talks about, right? In the context, anybody remember the context in Tanya? Why the Rebbe comes to the idea that every person has a little bit of Moshe? I got a little bit of Moshe in me, right? Anybody remember? Say it. Yira, right? By Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, all God wants from you is to fear Him. So the Gemara asks a rather obvious question. That's what I mean. All God wants. That's so simple, right? And so the Gemara says, Atu Yira Milsa Zutrosahi? Is Yira such a small thing? And what's the Gemara's answer? Yes. By Moshe Milsa Zutrosahi. By Moshe it's a small thing. But that's not a good answer. I mean, it obviously is a good answer, but we have to understand the answer, right? At first, that's not a good answer. I understand. Moshe is talking to us. He's not talking to himself. If Moshe is talking to himself, so he can say all the Eibishter wants is to fear him. For Moshe, that's no big deal. But for you and I, that's a big deal. So Moshe is talking to us. So how can he possibly say to us that all the Eibishter wants is for you to fear him, and fear is a small thing? No, it's not. Fear is a big mountain for us. So how can you say that to us? Oh, and how does the Alter Rebbe explain the Gemara? Now, what's the Gemara saying? By Moshe, it's a small thing. And since every single Jew has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama in him and her, so then by relative to that part of the Yid, so then Yira is a small thing. Every single Jew has a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama. That's the source of the idea in Chassidus that the Moshe Rabbeinu is the neshama klolis, yechida klolis. He's the general neshama, and every Jew has a spark of that neshama. The yechida of every Jew is a spark of the yechida klolis of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the essential connection and the metaphysical connection of every Jew to Moshe Rabbeinu. Now the Jew has to then bring that into his conscious reality, make that part of his life.
Is it also true for every single Nasi in the generation?
Absolutely. Especially with Moshe B'chol David. Absolutely. Anything we say about Moshe applies to the Moshe in every generation. Absolutely. 100%. That's what gives us the courage to do what it is we're able to do.
Rabbi, what was the term?
I'm
you
glad
used?
you asked the question, Gershon, because then I can say the answer without seeming like I'm flying a flag. You know, every now and then they get mad at me, I'm flying a flag, but that happens to be the truth. Yeah.
What was the term you used for the spark of Moshe? Sensitive?
Nitzutz is a spark. But the language in Chassidus is the Yechida. Yechida is the fifth level of Nefesh, right? Which is the name of the essence of the soul. There's really 6 levels, right? We learn in a number of places in Chassidus, including in Vata Tetzava, which we learned earlier. Yechida Shebenefesh is the name of the essence of the soul. And then there's a level beyond that, which is the essence itself, beyond name. Okay, say it. But Yechida Shebenefesh, the 5th level of the soul. So, Yechida Klolis, the general Yechida, is Moshe Rabbeinu. And each Yid has a Yechida Pratis, which is a little piece of that Neshama. And that's why they sing the song, I've got a little bit of Moshe in me. It's an amazing song. Absolutely amazing song. What gives me the koyach to get out of my Mitzrayim? I've got a little bit of Moshe in me. Moshe can get you out of Mitzrayim. I might not be able to get myself out of Mitzrayim, but Moshe can get me out of Mitzrayim. Right? And who am I? I've got a little piece of Moshe. That's what a Yid is. Every Yid.
The footnote of the fear of God is small and relative, where in the text is that footnote, so to speak, line up with?
I don't think the footnote's here.
No, I'm not. It's not here. I'm saying that this.
Where is it in Tanya?
No. But literally, reading it inside. What does that help us explain?
Al Yedei Bechinas Moshe Shabbai.
Okay.
All right, just explaining those lines.
Got it.
Well, what does that mean? The little piece of Moshe in me. The Bechina literally means quality. The quality of Moshe in me. All right? Bechina is like an equal sign. This is Bechina that. These two things have something to do with each other. If you ever learned the Kutei Maharan of Rav Nachman Breslev, so everything's Zeh Bechina, Zeh Bechina, Zeh Bechina. That's all the Torah. It's all that.
Also, which parak in Tanya is it?
42nd. She'in yonehu bittul Taras Moshe Avdi. Moshe's an Evid. Moshe's also Rabbeinu, which means he has a little bit of seichel. But he's also Avdi. Vayedei ze yeshna nesinas koyach l'kol echad Yisrael. And based on this, there's the empowerment to every single Jew. Vayedei bechinas Moshe shebei shekiyam a mitzvah shelo yeh bebittul the Kabbalah soul. That the Jews' mitzvahs will be the bittul of Kabbalah soul. Now, interestingly enough, the Gemara itself that's talking about that is talking about Yira. Is Yira such a small thing? And what's the basic understanding of Yira in Chassidus? Kabbalah soul. Yira is Kabbalah soul. Accepting upon myself the yoke of heaven, the commitment to the Eibishter, which is the basis of any relationship, including marriage, and we're not going there now. We've gone there, we'll go there in the future. Right now, we're not. Right? But the basis of a relationship is commitment, not love. Love grows out of the commitment, hopefully. Right? But the first, we say it every day before davening. We have a minhag to say part of chapter 41 in Tanya. Reishis Aveda B'Kara B'Sharsha. The beginning of all Aveda is what? Yira. And even though there's love, and even though there's such a thing called love, but ultimately it all has to be based on Yira, which is Kabbalah soul. That what? There's a king, and he told me what to do. So I listen. Right? Therefore, my relationship to the king is based more on the king than on me. The king's the king. Why are you doing what you're doing? Because the king's the king. And the word I doesn't have to be in the answer to the sentence, to the question. Right? Why do we keep Shabbos? Because God's God. Do I have to bring it into I? Absolutely. I have to bring it from that place into my conscious reality, so then it becomes a function of my ratzon and my intellect and my emotional state. Absolutely, that's what Avodah is all about. But where does it start? God's God. Right? There's a God, and He told me what to do, so that's what you do. It's good for us. It's amazing. It's incredible. Okay, say. I know that. I don't know that. I'll bring a mushal for women, so it won't be in any way, shape, or form challenging for any of us in the room. All right, but it's a good mushal. I heard it from Rabbi Levinger years ago. He said it to women. I also say it to women all the time. Right? I did actually in a different context last week. You preface it by saying, please don't get mad at me when I use this mushal. But what's Kabbalah Soul? This is based on a pshat in the Rebbe in that other Maimon that I mentioned earlier, Leisa Mishra Keilah. The Rebbe talks about doing it. It doesn't. I don't want to do it. I don't understand it. It does. I have no connection to it, but I do it anyway. What's that? So a young lady has a dress in her closet that she adores. She adores this dress. She thinks that she looks better in that dress than any other piece of clothing that she has. Right? She wants to wear the dress. She understands how she looks so nice in the dress. And she has a very, very powerful emotional connection to that dress. She loves that dress. And she loves putting it on, and she feels so good when she's wearing that dress. Is that something we can relate to? I didn't imagine there's such a thing, hopefully not in men, but certainly in women, right? Okay. Fine. I mean, there's certain things that you can relate on. I assume those of you who imagine yourself wearing a sirtuk and a gartel after your wedding can sort of see yourself in that and imagine like, wow, that's going to be cool. Okay. So she just loves this dress. But it's 2 inches too short, al pi Shulchan Aruch, in the knees and in the elbows. This dress is spiritual poison for this young woman. Kabbalah Soul is, she doesn't want to do this. She understands some level as to why she's doing it, but she doesn't understand it relative to the dress. She takes the dress out of her closet and gives it to someone who's 3 inches shorter than her. That's Kabbalah Soul. She really doesn't want to do this. She loves that dress. She thinks she looks great in that dress. But God doesn't like the dress. Why? Because she grew 2 inches too much. If she had just stopped growing a little before, this would be perfect. Mm-hmm. Now, when you say that to a bunch of girls, first of all, they look at you and they want to kill you. And then, but also, what do they say? They, to their credit, they say, well, she could take it to a seamstress and add a little piece of material. I get to say, but it never looks the same. That's my answer to them, and they say, yes, you're right. It looks the same. I've had daughters. Right? Can we imagine this? That we can appreciate the struggle of that young lady? That's real. But she says, look, take it away. I really don't want to do this. This is really, I don't want to do this. But here, take it. Don't let me see this dress again. I don't want to ever see this dress again. Why? Because I love this dress. If she sees the dress in 2 years, she'll go, oh, I love it. Okay. So we all have things like that in our life. Hopefully not dresses. If that is one of the issues, so then don't talk to a rabbi. Talk to someone a little more serious about problems like that than a rabbi. Now the Rebbe continues. Isa b'medrash. Now we're getting into the heart of the matter, because we're going to ask a question. And it's a very, very reasonable question. It's an amazing question. There's a medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, Zos Chukas. Al pasuk v'yikro elecha paraduma. On our pasuk, Amar le'Hakadosh Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lecha ani megale tam para. To you, I am revealing the reason for para, which we talked about yesterday. The Moshe understands paraduma. Aval la'acher chuk. But the others, everybody else, it's a chayk. You will understand the intellect of paraduma. Because we said every mitzvah has a ratzon, and every mitzvah also has a seichel. So for you, paraduma will be the same as a mishpat. That's really interesting. We'll see what problem arises from that. But tzarich lahavin, we have to understand. Kev and Shemesha hisiga tam to kol mitzvahs. Since Moshe Rabbeinu comprehended the reason for all mitzvahs, gam hatam the mitzvahs paraduma, including the mitzvah for paraduma. What did we just say in the previous paragraph? that the ability to express ourselves on the level of chuka, chakakti, gezeda, gezarti, I said so, therefore do it, which the prototype of that is paraduma. We get the koyach to do that from Moshe Rabbeinu. But from Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not a chayk. How can I get my koyach from Moshe Rabbeinu to do something that Moshe doesn't do, so to speak? Simple shot. Okay, let's see. All right. Don't answer the question. Understand the question. Our job isn't to give answers. Our job is to understand the question. I assume that the Rebbe is going to give us an answer, and I also assume that the Rebbe's answer will be better than the one that I think of. So, anytime you're learning anything, when the Gemara asks a question, don't answer it. Just read the next line in the Gemara. Right? What does the Gemara say the answer is? Right? That, because you're learning the Gemara, you're not learning yourself. Right? And the book you're learning happens to ask the question. So I assume, and we always say this, right? We just ask the question. So what's the next function going to be? I assume the next function is going to be an answer. So what's the answer? Do I understand the answer? I might not. Okay, if I don't understand the answer, go back to the question. Right? But I don't have to make up an answer. Ech nimshach al yodai, third line. Ech nimshach al yodai, how is it drawn down through him, and the sinus koyach, the empowerment, l'kiyam ha-mitzvahs, for the performance of mitzvahs, ba'ofen, in a way of chukah chakakti gezerah gezarti, that a decree, a statute I established, and a decree I decreed. Moshe is not there. Ulacha'ura. Now the Rebbe is going to give an answer that obviously by virtue of the words that he begins the answer with, he's not going to ultimately be satisfied with this answer. Right? This is an ilema. Ulacha'ura, haya efshar levar. At first glance, it's possible to explain. That's pretty obvious that the fact that it's only possible to explain means we're not going to explain it this way. You theoretically could explain it as follows. But, there's going to be a but. What that is, I don't know. First, let's see the explanation. At first glance, we could explain this based on that which is explained somewhere else. And the Rebbe tells you where that is in footnote 25. That what? Shebachol mitzvah yeshna shnei inyonim. Every mitzvah has two aspects. This is what we were talking about yesterday. Now we see it inside explicitly. The chukim u'mishpatim. Every mitzvah contains within it an aspect of chayk. That's the ratzon of the Kadosh Baruch of the mitzvah, the will of the mitzvah. And mishpat. That's the seichel of the mitzvah. Ki kol mitzvahs, all mitzvahs. And this idea here, what we're about to learn is all true. It's not that this information isn't true. This information just it's not going to answer the question we asked, but the information's true, so we better learn this carefully, because when you say, I could say as follows, well, what I'm about to say is true. It's not going to be a good enough answer to the question that we asked, how is that you and I get the koyach to perform the chayk from Moshe for whom it's not a chayk? That's our basic understanding of it right now. Now, it might be we got the question all wrong. Right, okay, but that's the basic question we asked. Okay, so now, the Rebbe says, I theoretically could explain it as follows. And as we mentioned yesterday, this is a sugya that is found in many, many places in the Rebbe, in Sichas, a lot of Parshas Chukas, obviously, Maimarim, Maimar in Chanukah, famous Maimar in Chanukah, which we probably learned this year, Chanukah, Melukat Hei, Yidmeli. Tana Rabbanan. In Tana Rabbanan, so the Rebbe talks about the fact that we have to appreciate that even that which is a mishpat is really coming from a place beyond our Tam Vadas. We talked about it yesterday. Don't think such a silly idea to think that that my understanding of why we shouldn't murder is the same as the Eibishter's understanding of why we shouldn't murder. Meaning my finite intellect's appreciation of the fact that murder is unreasonable. Why would I think that God's infinite wisdom understands that the same way I do? Okay. So, that means I'm not understanding it completely and totally. That's rather obvious. I mean, human intellect doesn't understand anything completely and totally, as incredible as it is. Okay. But this sugya that we're about to learn is incredibly important and very, very fundamental. Ki kol mitzvahs, all mitzvahs, gama mitzvahs de'eders, holidays and things, umishpatim, don't murder, don't kill, don't steal, sheyesh aleim tam, that those mitzvahs have a reason. Ultimately, what's the true source of the mitzvah? And we saw this before. Hemitzeni is the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The true source of the mitzvah is the will. V'rotzenu l'mayla mitam. And will is beyond reason. Will is beyond intellect. And now the Rebbe says inside what I said yesterday, and it confused a few people, but okay. L'mayla gam mi'ataymim shebechochmaso yizbarach. Also beyond the reasons that exist in God's wisdom, in God's intellect. God's intellect is infinite, I thought. Okay, but it's intellect. And intellect is a particular power. When we ascribe these powers to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and this is why you have to be very careful when you ascribe certain powers to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because by definition, intellect is limited. God's not limited. God's intellect isn't limited, but intellect is limited. What can intellect do? Deal with ideas. What can't intellect do? Feel. Intellect doesn't feel. I know every op-ed in every American newspaper now says, instead of people saying I think, they say I feel that. Right, well that's because they can't think straight. Right? I feel that Donald Trump is ... Good, bad, the devil, or God. Whichever, he's somewhere in between. Right? Okay. Fine. Who cares what you feel? I don't know. That's subjective view. Why are you spilling your feelings all over my living room table? Right? Tell me what you think, because then I can deal with it objectively. What you feel? So you feel that. Good. Okay. Good for you. You feel that. I'm glad you feel that. That's very nice. That's good for you. You should keep feeling. Right? Intellect is objective reality. Emotion is subjective reality. So one thing that intellect can't do is feel. Right? There's also things intellect can't understand. Why? Well, because they're not ideas. Intellect only understands ideas. Explain the color orange to someone who was born blind. You can't explain the color orange intellectually to someone who was born blind. Orange doesn't exist in his world. Because orange is not an idea, it's a color. Right? Orange is a visual experience. What if I don't have visual experience? So then orange doesn't exist. No, just think about it harder. No. Right? Because that's the intellect, there's things intellect doesn't do. There's lots of stuff intellect does do. Amazing stuff. Intellect is astounding. But that, I can't, once I start worshiping intellect, I paint myself into a little box, because there's all sorts of things that intellect can't appreciate, right? Intellect can't prove God in a laboratory. That doesn't mean God doesn't exist. Right? Intellect can't prove love in a laboratory either. Does that mean love doesn't exist? I believe in love. Why? Well, I've experienced it. Was it an intellectual experience? No. You are aware of it in your head. You're conscious of the feeling. But it's not an idea. It's a feeling. Okay. Everything happens in here because that's where we're conscious. I mean, when you stub your toe, you also feel it here, right? Okay, but what is that? This is an idea, my stubbed toe? No, it's not an idea at all. It's real. This hurts. Right? Really hurts. Then you take off your shoe and you see your nail is like it's bent up and there's that purple line and this is gonna hurt for 2 weeks. So I'm pain in the neck. Right? Okay. Where it goes. Right? Careful next time. It's not an idea. Can intellect understand why that happens? Yes, intellect. You could go to a doctor and explain to you exactly what happened, what physical phenomena happened when you did what you did, and therefore this is what's happened. There's no question, there's that aspect of it. But that's not what I'm feeling in my toe. I'm not feeling the idea in my toe, I'm feeling the pain in my toe. right? I can explain the pain. That's an idea. Okay. And once I've seen orange, then you could have two designers discussing in a very sophisticated way how to use orange and create in this material a certain look by virtue of the shade of orange you want this material dyed. That's all intellect. But the blind guy doesn't have a clue what they're talking about. Because everything can be talked about on intellect once we've experienced it outside of our intellect, outside of ourselves. But there's nothing, you and I can't create something from nothing in our intellect. It has to be that it already exists somewhere, and then you and I can talk about it. So orange for the blind person doesn't exist, so then you can't think about it.
So our intellect is a byproduct of our something that cannot be explained. Our intellect is a byproduct of something that cannot be explained. Or like something
I don't know what that means exactly, but I mean the source of our intellect is a level beyond intellect, so to speak. Chochmah is the source of intellect, so it's the power of intellect. So I can't really explain how that works. I just know it does. And sometimes it'll work more clearly, and sometimes it'll work less clearly. Some people have it work extremely powerfully, some other people have it work less powerfully. Okay, but how that all works is sort of, okay, say it, but then we become conscious of it in that place called bina. That's why, interesting enough, there's no conjugation of the verb chokhmah. You can conjugate anything mitchakem and all that, but the simple conjugation of the word chokhmah, there is no ani what?
What's conjugation?
I run, you run, he runs, conjugating the verb run. Right? There is no conjugation of the verb of the word chokhmah in a simple kal form. That's not chokhmah. That's choshev. That's choshev. Where does ani begin? Bina. Ani mevin. There's no ani in chokhmah. That's why chokhmah is a source of bit. Can't say ani about chokhmah, because chokhmah is the source of the appreciation of ani, but it's not ani yet. It's not me yet. It's that power that I have that allows me to experience ani. But where does ani begin? Ani mevin. I understand. How do I understand? Oh, because I have this power called chokhmah that helps me understand. How exactly does that work? I really don't know. I'm not sure. But if you teach me 2 + 2 is 4, I'll get it. Teach it to a dog. He won't. Right? Why do I get it? I don't know. There's something in there that just helps me get it. I'm not sure how it works. I'm really not sure. Okay, Beseder, you can talk about, the things going on in the gray matter. But bottom line, how does it all? I don't know. There's this thing called intellect. Baruch Hashem. It's amazing. It's incredible. Source of all evil in the world, of course. But, the only creature that can do something against the will of God is the one that has serious intellect. It's called a human. But, okay. So we have to be careful with it. But it's astounding. It's just amazing, right? I mean, look at this thing. This little piece of plastic here. When I grew up, this was called science fiction. It was not much science fiction. Matter of fact, it's very interesting. Someone wrote an article about the fact that even science fiction, the idea of a cell phone doesn't appear in any science fiction movie or novel. The idea that you should have a phone in your pocket that you take out, dial a number, and say hello. Maxwell Smart had one in his shoe, I understand. It was a joke, okay? But the idea, now, walkie-talkie, like beam me up, Scotty, okay, that was out there. The idea that you should be able to take a phone out of your pocket, dial a number, and talk doesn't appear anywhere in any science fiction until it became real. Because it's so far out that it's like no one even thought of it. Which is really interesting, right? I mean, they walkie-talkies, no problem. Flip the thing and you talk to someone else at the other end of this thing. You're on Mars and he's on Venus. Okay, you can talk, no problem. Okay. Call home from the supermarket? Nah, impossible. Absolutely impossible. Men, just one second, men shop now?
Hi, honey. What are you?
Which one do you want? And you show them the 3 different things. So when you come home, they can't say you got the wrong one, which takes away a lot of the joy of being a wife. But what can we do? Yeah.
Phones in Brave New World.
What?
Phones in Brave New World. Cell phones.
Cell phones? Okay, I don't know. This is why I read. I read Brave New World so long ago that the idea of a cell phone didn't probably resonate in me.
That's how they talk to the people in the savage lands. The people that live outside.
What
the
they
society.
call them, or they have like walkie-talkies?
They call them.
They call everybody has a different
It
number.
doesn't look like an iPhone, I'm sure, but
Yeah, Manyen. Okay, Manyen.
But the idea of having a unique number?
that I can't remember. I read it a long time ago too, but I
Right.
just remember.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Okay, I have to look into that. Because I just found the article really, obviously I did not check out every science fiction.
Oh.
I wasn't ever a science fiction fan b'chlal. So I was not like, how many science fiction novels did I ever read? They told us we had to read a few. Some Ray Bradford stuff we had to read in high school. So, okay, so I read Ray Bradford.
Spend a lot of time with that.
Fahrenheit 451, The Illustrated Man, maybe something else. I don't. Yeah. We had to read that stuff, right? Which was good. It's not a problem. Nothing happened. I didn't become stupider. I didn't become smarter. I didn't become stupider. But I would have, in retrospect, I guess I would have rather have been learning something else. But God had His plan. Right? One thing I will say, parenthetically. You don't have to, what's the word in English? You don't have to, I'll say it a roundabout because I can't find the right word. There's one very, very simple word that would say exactly what I want, but it's not in my head. Introduce. You don't have to introduce your children to that stuff. You knew it? Okay. Fine. That's the way you grew up and you're just fine. Baruch Hashem, you ended up where you ended up and you're doing just fine. Don't worry about it. But it is not necessary that your children know who Ray Bradford is or Isaac Asimov. They don't have to know, and don't put it in their head because it'll just get in the way of all the real stuff they have to know about. They don't have to know about Get Smart. They don't have to know about, MASH. They don't have to know any of that nonsense. Is it the worst stuff in the world? No, actually, it was funny and interesting and entertaining, but not necessary. So they don't need it. So don't give it to them. They'll do better without it. They really will, because you know what? You're going to have that noise banging around in your head for a long time, because it's just in there. What are you supposed to do? Pretend it's not in there? It's in there. Right? Okay, never. Right? Not your fault that it's in there. Just, God's fault, right? He put you where He put you. Okay. So, but you don't have to give it to your kids. Sometimes the Baal Tshuva thinks, there's certain things that are important. No. I don't have to know all that. Right? Is it the end of the world if they find out about something? No, it's also not the end of the world. But to introduce them to it, this is important, and you have to. Nothing necessary about kimat anything in that genre. Might they end up being someone who enjoys reading science fiction in the bathroom? They might. Okay, fine. Right? You have to read something in there. Right? Okay. I mean, how much Spider Solitaire can you play? Right? So what?
So much Sudoku.
Okay, so whatever it is. Right? Okay, so say there, but it's an important thing. Okay, let's go further here. A few more minutes. שבכל מצווה יש להם שני עניינים מחוקים ממשפטים, כי כל מצווה גם המצווה דיידס משפטים יש להם טעם, הם רצון יסברך, ורצון למעלה מטעם. Now, this line, למעלה גם, right in the middle of the paragraph, לגבי למעלה מהטעמים שבחוכמוסו יסברך. Intellect is limited. That means there's aspects of the Eibishter's reality that the Eibishter's intellect doesn't understand. Just like there's aspects of your reality that your intellect doesn't understand. Why? Because your intellect is limited? Your intellect is limited? No, because intellect is limited. And your intellect is also. God's isn't, but it doesn't matter. Because there's certain aspects of reality that intellect doesn't touch. Because intellect does certain things and doesn't do other things. So there'll be aspects of godly, for instance, Classic. Why did the Eibishter create the world? What's the reason Chassidus brings more than any other reason as to why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world? Dir b'tachtonim. And and you added the right word. That what? Nit aver. He had a taiva for dir b'tachtonim. That's the language in the Medrash in the Tanchuma. Parshas Nosei, next week's Parsha. Right? Not this, next week. Right? Parshas Nosei. Ois, des Vav, des Zayin. Right? That he had a taiva for a dir b'tachtonim. And why did Chazal use the word taiva specifically? To teach us that it's something beyond tam v'das, beyond intellect. That's a taiva, right? You come in on a hot day, you're schwitzing, you're all red and sweaty. You take off your coat, your whatever, and you're really hot. Right? And you say, oh, let's have a taiva for a cup of tea. So let's have a cup of tea. What do you want a cup of tea for? I don't know. I just have a taiva for a cup of tea. Right? That's the difference between a taiva and a rotzah. A taiva is something that can't be explained rationally. Why do you have a taiva for a cup of tea? I don't know. The whole way home, I've been thinking about it. I want a nice cup of tea. If you came and you said a nice cold glass of water, that I get. You're look at you. You're schwitzing. So of course you'd be thinking about a nice cold glass of water. No. Had a taiva for a cup of tea. Perfectly reasonable to want a cold glass of water. Unreasonable to want a cup of tea, but that was his taiva. Okay, and that's why we call it a taiva. So the Eibishter had a taiva for dir b'tachtonim. What does that mean? That means the Eibishter himself, so to speak, cannot tell you why. Nowhere in Chochmah Datzilis will it explain to you why he had a taiva for a dir b'tachtonim. It came from a place beyond intellect in the Eibishter, just like there's places beyond intellect in you. We all have places beyond intellect. There are some people who think we don't, which is it's just so silly and unsophisticated understanding. I mean, how does advertising work? Advertising is all trying to touch a place in your subconscious, superconscious, not about intellect, right? Okay. And it works. Why do you love your father? Oh, because you've come to the intellectual understanding that your father is worthy of your love, right? No, it's coming from a much deeper place in you that transcends intellect. Right? It might even be, and we've talked about this before, and I apologize for bringing up an unfortunate example, but it might even be that if someone chas v'sholem has an abusive father, so obviously intellectually he should have nothing to do with him. Why would you want to have anything to do with an abusive person? Pretty hard for that kid to pull away. Right? Why? This isn't an intellectual decision. There's a lot more going on here. His connection to that person is much more powerful than intellect. Because if it was just intellect, you say, who are you? Just be quiet and leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. Okay, well, you can say that to other people. And you probably do. You know, some bus driver starts screaming at you. Okay, I have nothing to do with this guy. Leave me alone. What's wrong with you? Who are you? Hard to do in certain instances. Why? Because there's a much more powerful connection that transcends intellect. Okay, so even the Eibishter's intellect only understands things that intellect understands. Again, that's the problem of ascribing certain powers to the Eibishter, because by definition, not that the Eibishter is limited, the power is limited. Intellect is limited. It's a specific expression of something. So the Eibishter's intellect does perfectly what intellect can do, but there's things intellect can't do. La'achresha rotzen the mitzvahs, and since the rotzen of mitzvahs, the will of the mitzvah, gam ha-mitzvahs de chukim, also the mitzvah of chukim, va'afilu mitzvahs paraduma, and even the mitzvah of paraduma, which is the prototypical chayk, that was explained this to us yesterday, shenimshach v'nislavesh b'chochma, that is not sheni. Nimshach is drawn down and clothed in chochma, the Torah. Nisvasev b'hem tam. Even the ultimate chayk has a tam. There is a tam. There is a reason. There is a seichel to that mitzvah. It just might be, as we talked about yesterday, that seichel doesn't resonate down into human intellect. But there's a level in which paraduma has a tam. The Eibishter's intellect can explain paraduma. And therefore, what does the Eibishter say to Moshe Rabbeinu? I'll explain it to you. Just no one else. But there is a tam. There's a tam of that mitzvah. Keep reading, let's see if we can finish the paragraph in 2 minutes. V'chiluk shebein ha-mitzvahs te'edus u'mishpatim la-mitzvahs te'chukim. Then what's the difference between a chayk and a mishpat? They both have ratzon and they both have tam. They're both an expression of God's will and an expression of God's wisdom. So what's the difference? Sheba mitzvahs te'edus u'mishpatim, the mitzvahs of edus u'mishpatim, ha-ta'amim shebachachmasa yizbarech. The reason for those mitzvahs that exists in a Kadosh Baruch Hu's intellect, nimshechu are drawn down, v'nislavshu and clothed, also b'seichel nivroim, also in the intellect of created reality. Va'ad, to such an extent that it'll come down even to v'seichel anoishi, human intellect. Mishpatim. The chokhmah of don't murder that exists up there in Olam Atzilus, that chokhmah emanates downward all the way into the physical world. And so human beings can appreciate a reason not to murder. The reason not to murder? No, the reason not to murder exists in Chokhmah Datzilus. That's in God's brain, so to speak. A reason not to murder? No problem. All right. Is there a reason for paraduma down here? No. Doesn't make any sense. It's counterintuitive, as Daniel explained yesterday. The one who makes this one Torah ends up becoming Tomei. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, fine, say there. It doesn't have to make sense.
But there was, though. By Moshe, there was.
Because in Eilam Atzilus, there's a Tam. And the Eibishter revealed that Tam to Moshe Rabbeinu.
Okay.
We'll talk about, now we don't have time, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow's going to be review time because my little capsule went all the way through. When they took the x-ray, so I saw the little I can actually show you the x-ray if you want to see it. It's actually quite fascinating because you now, on your app of your Kupat Cholim, they send you your x-ray.
Nice.
So I saw my x-ray and I showed it to my wife. I said, see that little thing there? She said, yeah, that's your capsule. I said, where is it? She said, it's in the large intestine. I said, oh, that's very good news. Because I didn't know this. I learned all sorts about things about my intestines, about panemius. Right? Okay, I'll show it to his face. It's very fascinating. It really is. Right? Okay. Uba mitzvahs the chukim. What happens with the chayik? Well, we just said it. The reason doesn't resonate down. It stays there. Doesn't come down. Is there a reason? Yes. If your brain is a brain of Chokhmah Datzilus, you could understand this, but mine isn't. One person had such a brain, and we'll understand why. And that person's name is Moshe Rabbeinu. Rebbe's going to explain to us why it is that Moshe understood it. It's astounding. But mitzvahs the chukim, atamim shelahem, the reason for the mitzvahs, lo nislavshu kol kach. They weren't clothed so much in the seichel of nivroim, in the intellect of created reality. Okay, now we talked about that yesterday. That there are certain mitzvahs that there is an explanation of the mitzvah in metaphysical terms, right? Wool and linen, right? We talked about shatnez. Cain brought a korban from linen, flax. Hevel brought a korban from wool, sheep. Oh, wool and linen don't seem to mix very well, do they? Oh, okay. Now, is that something can be understood in a laboratory in Elam Hazeh Gashmi? No. Right? And even when and the people love to do this, they find, oh, look, you see that shatnez really does it. It affects you in such and such a way. Baba Mises. Why is it Baba Mises? Because there's 8 billion people in the world who are allowed to wear it. So obviously, it doesn't affect you negatively. Because it doesn't affect them negatively. So what? It affects you negatively, not them? It affects you spiritually negatively, for sure. Physically? No. It's not down here. In that it's a metaphysical thing. Tuman tara b'chlal. Right? The idea of something being tameh, something being tahor. You can figure out in a laboratory that this guy's tameh mace? Of course not. It just doesn't, it's not, it's just, no such thing. Right? Okay. But there's something called tuman tara. Why? Well, because the Torah imposes that chayk on us. Can you explain that in Olam Atzilus? Yes, absolutely. Could it be explained even on slightly lower levels of reality, meaning maybe up there in Eilam Abriya, the Malachim understand this on a certain level? Yeah. Can you prove it in a laboratory in Eilam Hazeh with physical reality? No. Okay, it doesn't descend all the way down into physical reality. Is there a level in which it could be understood? Yeah, brother. What does dam represent? What is it? Right? Because dam has a lot to do generally with tuma, right? Affects women. Tumas mace. It says to do with, it doesn't have to do with dam per se, but obviously dam is involved. Right? Okay. Right, so what is dam? What is blood? How does it work? Okay, but that's all going to be metaphysical information. Really physical. Right? I mean, the very fact that korbanos are all about sprinkling dam, there must be some really interesting stuff going on with this dam stuff. Yeah, there is. And is it explained in Chassidus? Yes, it is explained in Chassidus. Again, but that information which you'll learn in Chassidus, meaning the tam of it is descended down into some spiritual realm, and you and I can understand that because Chassidus opens us up to those ideas, Beseda, but can I then explain down here in Eilam Hazeh Gashmi why that works? No. Can I appreciate the fact that it does work? Yeah, of course. Human intellect can appreciate that, and humans have been sprinkling blood on the altar. I mean, we did that for, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. We're waiting to do it again. Vatam de mitzvahs paraduma b'chochmasi yisbarach. The tam of paraduma is in the Eibishter's wisdom. Chochma datzilus. Okay, highest of the four worlds, and we'll talk about that when we get there relative to Moshe. V'loy nimshach klal b'seichel hanavim, and isn't drawn down at all into the intellect of any created reality, even angels in Eilam Abriya. Paraduma stays there in Eilam Atzilus. The reason for Paraduma exists in Eilam Atzilus, the highest of the four worlds, which is a world of godliness, not a world of creation. What comes out of Eilam Atzilus, the next step in the process, is Eilam Abriya, the world of creation, and in that world there are very, very lofty, holy, metaphysical beings. Right? Gan Eden Elyon, upper Gan Eden is in Eilam Abriya, meaning very lofty souls that are down here go back to that place when they leave this world. Very holy angels live in Eilam Abriya. Okay? What's above that? Eilam Atzilus. What's in Eilam Atzilus? The Eibishter. 10 spheres. The revelation of those 10 different aspects of godly reality. Eilam Atzilus. One of them is Chochmah. Okay? One of the 10 spheres is Chochmah. The Eibush is Chochmah. Chochmah Datzilus. Where does the reason for Paraduma live? There. Who's the only human being who ever lived there consciously? Moshe. Moshe. Shlomo Melech tried. He said, I didn't get there. He tried. He talks about it. He writes about it. He says, I tried. But all of the others, I couldn't figure it out. He was smart. Okay, now we'll discuss this later, but the Rebbe says it here parenthetically. Actually, they're called brackets. But kind of bracketetally, I don't think you say that. And that which Moshe did comprehend tampara hu lefisha gam biyose lemata, even when he is below. Haya bechinas chochma datzilus begilui. He was on the level of chochma datzilus in a revealed way. Now, what does that mean? It's an amazing thing. We're going to see later in the Maimer. It's going to say relative to Moshe, loy psik beineim. Yaakov, Avram, Moshe, even Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, in the Torah, meaning obviously not in the written Torah, but in the if you write down the Torah, so there's a psik beineim. There's a little mark that separates the first Avram from the second Avram, the first Yaakov from the second Yaakov. Even the first Yud Kei Vav Kei from the second Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's talking about two different levels of godly reality. But Moshe, what does it say? Ein psik beinehem. There's no psik, meaning Moshe above and Moshe below are the same. Which means what in Datzilus was godly reality. Avram Avinu wasn't there. Avram's Avram's, every single has a consciousness of Olam Atzilus, because every single one of us, the level of Chaya Shebenefesh, while you and I are down here, there's a level of our soul called Chaya Shebenefesh, and where is it right now as you and I are down here thinking about breakfast, but there's davening before, right? It's in Olam Atzilus. There's part of you in Olam Atzilus right now experiencing godliness in a very, very powerful and clear way. Okay, how much does that resonate down here? Hello, right? I'm not there. I'm here. So I might be thinking it's Tuesday. So what's that? Barekas? I'm not sure, right? Okay, I'm not thinking about that. But okay, fine. Mesha's conscious reality down here is Olam Atzilus. Even Avraham Avinu wasn't there.
Are we going to get an answer? Because this makes me nervous. How God does a psik, but Moshe doesn't.
Two different levels of the Eibishter. It's not that the Eibishter doesn't under the Eibishter, but there's two different levels of Shem Havaya. That's all this is. Right? Two different aspects of godly revelation. Those two different names of Shem Havaya. It's not that God gets something on one level and doesn't get it on the other. It's two different aspects of His revelation to us. Havaya, Kel Rachum Lachum. It's not that the second Havaya doesn't get what the first Havaya gets. That's not what it means. It just means that you're talking about two different levels. What are godly names about? The Eibush is the Eibishter.
Yeah.
But there's different aspects of God's revelation to us. Okay, higher, lower, more complete, less complete.
No,
So that's what Shem Havaya. We know there's a level in simple pshat. Havaya de Leila, Havaya de Latata. There's a level of Yudke Vavke which is the source of the light that emanates into the four worlds. What's the source of the kelim, of the vessels of those four worlds? Elokim, Shem Elokim. Okay, beautiful. So the level of Havaya is completely transcendent of the four worlds. It's the four worlds. Okay, so that's
no, that's not the part that makes me nervous. It's the other part. It's the Moshe Rabbeinu part. It's the if we reflect the aspects of God, when Moshe doesn't have this aspect reflected in him.
Well, Adarabah, I understand. When we say it relative to the Eibishter, it's not that in any way, shape, or form the way we're saying it relative to Avram. Moshe is more godly this way because he represents a state of complete godly existence that's in no way, shape, or form modified or limited by virtue of his existence in Elam Hazah.
Okay.
Right? Now, ultimately, is there really a difference between the higher level of Shem Havaya and the lower level of Shem Havaya? No, it's all Einoid Mulvada. It's all him. Okay. But in terms of our appreciation of godly revelation, so there'll be different levels of godly revelation. Where's Moshe living consciously as he's walking around in Elam Hazah? Elam Atzilus. It's just beyond belief. What does it look like up there? It's all Elokus. There isn't anything else. Elam Atzilus is a place where everything is godly. Even the kelim, even the vessels. Because what lives up there? Not angels. Angels are created reality. What lives up there? 10 spheres. So when we talk about light being clothed in vessels, we're talking about 10 different aspects of godly revelation. 10 spheres. That's Elam Atzilus. So Moshe's conscious reality is. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu understands Paraduma, because that's where Paraduma lives, so to speak. In Chochmah B'Tzilus. It just doesn't descend down to any other level of intellect. But Moshe's intellect is up there. We'll see as we go further. So we're trying to answer our question as to how it is that Moshe can be the source of our ability to do something b'Kabbalah's whole as a chayk when we say that by Moshe there's no chayk. Okay, we're still trying to understand that question. Right? Well, understand the answer to that question. Right? But we know the answer is not going to be accepted because the Rebbe begins, well, you could say like this, but obviously we're not going to. That doesn't mean that the information we just learned isn't true. It's just not going to be the answer. Okay. Tomorrow, please do review. And then Thursday we'll start moving. Tomorrow at 8:45 I have to be connected. Panemius and my Hutzainis. Ain psik beinehem.
Oh no!
There'll be no separation. My innards and my outers will be.
So can we see your large intestine?
Well, no, it's not my large intestine.
No, I know,
It's
the
actually
X-ray
very
was it.
interesting. No, but it really is fascinating. I mean, sure, you can look up these pictures anywhere online, but when it's you, it's
You.
yeah, it is. It was.